Hey everybody, I'm Jesse, producer of the No Quitting the Home Team podcast. I wanted to give a quick disclaimer in that while we hope anyone who listens would gain wisdom and insight from Dave and Renee's conversations, this is still a podcast intended for married couples, and to that end there will occasionally be dialogue around sexual intimacy and other related topics. So, for those of you who may be single and particularly sensitive to this subject matter, or those who may be listening at home or in the car with their kids around, we wanted to give you a heads up in advance so that you might continue listening at your own discretion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 9, No Quitting the Home Team. I'm Renee.
I'm Dave.
I'm Jesse.
We are glad, so thrilled you joined us for another marriage book.
Yes.
Plum chuffed.
Today what we have on deck is a book called What Did You Expect? Redeeming the Realities of Marriage by Paul Tripp. And
Christian book or non-Christian book?
this is a super Christian book.
Yes.
Uber Christian.
Quite Christian.
Yeah, very Christian.
Thoroughly Christian.
And which I think it's Christian in all the right ways. And I can't wait to get into it. I'm not sure if I like the premise of the book, but I like the reality of the book.
Okay. Nice little teaser. Well, on this broody, moody Thursday afternoon, how are we all doing? Just for the
Delightful.
listener to know, it's 50 degrees and raining and overcast, and we could be in Seattle right now.
This is the weather my soul needs.
Yeah, it's amazing right now. It's perfect weather. We had a men's Bible study early this morning, woke the boys up for it, and just waking them up. It's cold outside, a little rainy. The four of us going to the study together early in the morning. It was like the perfect way to start a day.
So I don't even have to ask because I know your windows were open last night because we are of one mind in that regard. But the question is, was your house below 60 when you left this morning?
So this is interesting about our house because we live in a 1920s bungalow.
Which means
It is a brick oven. So it actually takes a while for it to cool down. So since it was actually, I think the air actually came on last night because it's been so warm. So it'll take a few days to regulate itself. But so consequently, we still had our window unit on with the window open.
Again, I assumed.
And the central air.
This is
on.
well documented on this podcast.
Which will resurface later in the podcast as another maybe what I'm into.
nice.
No foreshadowing there. Yeah. So how are we doing? How are you doing, Dave?
I am doing great. Right now, what I'm thinking about like marriage and family is I got asked to do something yesterday that I don't know quite how to handle it. You and I have talked about it. I'm honored to be asked, and yet it's sort of surfacing a lot of like family of origin anxiety plus like just some fear. So my oldest son yesterday asked me to get a tattoo with him. And
Which it kind of hurt my feelings that he didn't ask me.
oh,
Would it have hurt your feelings if he just asked me and not you?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I get it. Who wants to get a tattoo? What boy wants to get a tattoo with their mom?
I don't know, maybe
I don't know. I wasn't included in and maybe he thought I wouldn't do it.
I think it's the opposite. I think he knew you probably would have done it without much hesitation.
probably true.
Right.
That's probably
the,
true.
the trepidation and hand wringing from Dad probably made it worth asking.
So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about it today, and it wouldn't be anything that I would do until the end of the year. But I think as a kind of a shared experience together,
Yeah.
maybe a part. He's asked me, to kind of chaperone international trip with he and his buddies as they graduate.
Again, I wasn't asked to join on this Icelandic adventure.
Right. But it might be kind of cool to get a tattoo.
In Iceland?
Maybe in Iceland.
With all his senior buddies?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's
And maybe,
rite of passage.
yeah,
Kind of
I just think
kind of a white Protestant bar mitzvah of sorts.
wow, that's a lot to unpack there.
Well, it is like a Christian. He wants to get like a
Coming of
Christian
age.
symbol thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming
it's,
of age.
It's a Cairo, Alpha Omega. It's a really cool sort of ancient symbol. And where he wants it, I think, is really cool, kind of on the wrist. Like I like everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
The only hesitation I have is just that my
You're-
upbringing, how I was reared, is that you don't get tattoos. I can show you the verse in Leviticus.
I could
tells you-
I could counter with some other Levitical verses that
Okay.
we don't really apply directly either.
Right.
I was going
I'm
to
just
say
saying-
we don't need to break down ceremonial versus sacrificial.
Right. I'm just
versus,
saying, I know
yeah.
what those verses are because they've been
Yeah.
imprinted into my soul. And so that really isn't the issue. The main issue
Is you don't like pain.
is I'm averse to needles.
Yeah.
And evidently those are used in making tattoos.
So I hear.
So anyway, but
They're moving really
I'm
fast.
happy that he's asked me. So it's kind of made me in a good mood today. So I'm
Feeling
doing good.
all loved
Yeah.
and connected by your 18-year-old son.
A little bit. And I'm feeling maybe you're feeling kind of slighted from that. Right
Maybe.
now. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit.
How are you doing, honey?
I'm good. I, like Jesse, love this weather. I think we have like a reverse vitamin D acquisition process, don't you? Somehow our vitamin D.
That's called vampirism.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it.
Tomato.
Yep, right. I feel like we have so much going on. You know, we have never had a senior child before, and so there's just so much that has to happen that's wrapped up in that. And guys, this college thing, this process is a thing.
It is.
And
It's a whole thing.
Man, significantly more of a thing than when we did it, however many years ago.
We just had like these little forms to fill out, and you may put them in a mail, and then you get a letter back, and that's
Yeah.
pretty much it.
And it's a state school, so you're almost guaranteed to get a
Totally.
spot.
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, so our boys' school, they go to a charter school within Denver Public Schools, and every junior and senior student is assigned a college. His entire job is a college admission expert. So his job is to meet with Will and meet with us and just make sure we're doing all the things.
Kind of guide us through the process.
Right. So we as in Dave, Will, Mr. Whipple, and I had a meeting yesterday where he kind of laid out like what has been done, what needs to be done, and he had this crazy program where he could statistically predict whether or not Will would get into these various schools based on who knows what.
Yeah.
But he kind of turned his computer around, and we were like, is that really what you think the percentage that he'll get in? Because some of these schools were like,
Really good. Like,
well, and it's like, there's no way, right? Like, go ahead and apply. Pipe dream kind of.
They're officially called reach schools, but it's like in the same way that I can like reach for the ceiling.
Right.
Right. Like I'm never touching it. It's like you can reach all you want.
The
Right.
ceiling Dave is reaching for is about 20 feet high.
Yeah.
For those
Yeah.
who don't have video, which is all of you.
So anyway, it was kind of overwhelming to know all what needs to be done by October 1st and October 15th and November 1st and November 15th.
And then he might actually get into college, and
And then we have to figure out how to come up
we have
with
to figure out how to pay for it. Yeah.
So we're listing our kidneys on the market beginning next week if anyone needs a kidney.
You do that. I'll pray he ends up at a school with an astronomical endowment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, exactly. That's our. Anyway, it was overwhelming, and it's kind of this. I think I've said this before. It's kind of this nervous energy. Like a lot needs to happen. It's really exciting, and Will is just like thrilled and working so hard in a way we've never seen him work hard. But I don't know. It's a little strange.
Yeah.
So I feel like we have this lingering cloud of excited stress.
Sort of butterfly feeling a little bit.
Yeah.
Cool. What about you, Jesse? How are you? How's marriage treating you?
Yeah, our marriage is great. We're both just, we are in full-on survival mode for the next 4 days until we get to Mexico with the idea of turning our phones off for a week. So that's...
We're going to hold you to that because I think people say turn their phones off. You need to really turn it off.
The the little safe that they have in your room, I turn my phone off and I put it in that safe and I make Shell set the code for it.
Oh, good.
That's I'm serious about.
That's some hardcore accountability.
I'm serious about this.
That's great.
So everything we are doing is with that just right within our reach. What didn't help, similar to Renee, this weather is feeding my soul, and slept with all the windows open in the house last night. It was 50 degrees. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
It's actually 48.
48, exactly. So at 3:15 or so in the morning, Shell wakes me up and she's like, hey, there's a car that's just sitting outside of our house.
Gosh.
I'm like, oh, okay, great. So I go and I'm looking out the window, and there's this SUV just idling in front of our house with its lights on, its wipers going.
No one in
sitting
it?
there. No, there's someone in it. And I can see there's like a light on in the car and they're moving around and stuff. And my first thought is, well, they're parked right behind my Kia. They're probably about to steal my car, which for the record has already been successfully stolen once and attempted to be stolen 2 other times.
Oh, gosh.
So all
But
I
usually
have,
that's at Fellowship Denver Church.
yeah,
not at your
usually it's
home.
here and not on my block, but it's 3 a.m. So all bets are off. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, great, this guy's trying to steal my car.
You didn't think maybe he was an Uber for one of your neighbors who's going to the airport?
I sat for about 10 minutes before I came to any, before I made any judgments. In the meantime, I locked my car loudly. It's got a little beep alarm. Yeah, I did that a few times. I flashed our porch light, kind of strobe, flashed our porch light to try and get his attention to be like, hey,
Leave.
don't sit in front of my house, creep. But nothing took. So he's hanging out there, and after about 30 minutes, I was like, man, I don't know what this is, but it's weird, and I know I'm not going to be able to sleep, and Shell's not going to be able to sleep. So I did the last thing I typically want to do, and that was I called the cops.
Yeah. I was say, don't go out there. Hopefully you didn't go out there.
No. I called the non-emergency line, and they were there in about 5 minutes, chatted with them. Everything seemed to be fine.
And
nothing untoward.
The purpose of his visit was?
I didn't hear any of that. I didn't ask for a follow-up. I was like, I don't need you to follow up with me. I would like you to make sure nothing untoward is happening, and I would like you to ask them to leave my house. And and they did. They pulled up kind of diagonally across the street about 3 houses, and then just sat there doing whatever it was they were doing. And I was like, okay, whatever. The cops gave them an all clear or whatever. So I went back to sleep. So I did not sleep well last night. But we're here, and 4 days till Mexico.
Oh my gosh.
4 days till Mexico.
Oh my gosh, the definition of hope.
Yeah.
How many hours and how many minutes and seconds?
If I'd slept more, I could have given you that right off the cuff. But anyway, our marriage is great, and we're very excited, and nobody stole my car last night.
That's fantastic.
So double bonus.
Fantastic.
All right, let's transition to the book, honey.
Great.
I actually like the title.
So the title, what did you expect? Certainly doing pre-marriage counseling, a lot of people go in with expectations that are just going to be disappointed. And so
I feel like culturally there's so many tropes people inherit, even subconsciously. Like, you complete me, my better half, my soulmate.
Yeah.
I mean, think of all the expectations of finding a person.
And people really think I'll never feel any differently about you. And
Yeah, Jerry Maguire's done some harm.
yeah, that's right. So when people do have feelings shift, when the dynamics of the relationship do kind of take a downward turn, then they panic and
assume that it's gone wrong.
they've married the wrong person. Something's horribly at play here. And the kind of the first couple of chapters of the book is really him just sort of recalling all of these people who have used him as a marriage counselor. So he's a pastor, counselor, writer, but he's done a lot of counseling, and it's people calling him, you did my pre-marriage counseling, but now it's like, now that we're married, now that we're a few months into it, I realize I've made a big mistake. So the premise of the book is that people need to kind of slow their roll. They need to lower the expectation because there's a theological reality they haven't appreciated, which is that they're a sinner. And the person they're marrying is a sinner. So you have one sinner who's now committed to a lifelong relationship to another sinner, two people who are self-oriented and innately selfish.
And often can mask those
because
less desirable characteristics while dating, but then are unable to keep those parts of themselves
exactly
repressed while intimately living with someone else.
Right. So, you're kind of married. There's sort of a mirror kind of and reflecting your own issues, but then you see really clearly your spouse's issues. So, and then we have two people married to each other, both sinners. There is almost like my sinful behavior and patterns causes you to respond in your uniquely sinful way. And it kind of creates a kind of monster, this sort of pretty horrible kind of dynamic of sinfulness, compounding sinfulness. So
I didn't love the classifying that all as sin though, because sometimes it's just idiosyncrasies and annoyances that they're not sinful.
Right.
It's just learning to live with someone's, like one of our kids cannot stand the sound of people eating. He cannot, to the point where he often can't, depending on what we're having, he can't sit with us.
As a family.
And that would cause significant disruption in marriage, but it's not sinful. I hate it that it's all kind of thrown into that category, because some of the what did you expect, I feel like, is just little piddly things that we have to bear with each other.
Right. It's idiosyncratic.
Yeah.
But the categories he uses
I know.
are
I just feel like
sin,
that was overly theologizing it.
Totally. But in terms of what he wants people to get in this book is, hey, let's readjust our expectations of each other and ourselves. We are broken. We are selfish, and there are negative. Every part of our personality has been touched by sin. And so because of that, we're going to experience real heartache. And so if we don't think that we're going to experience that, then we're not living according to that reality. Therefore, we will be disappointed,
right,
and marriage will suffer as a result. So that's the premise. That's the title, and kind of the first couple of chapters, he really gets into that. Here's what's good about that. What's good about that is that is a reality. People should have their expectations brought down a little bit. Part of my goal in pre-marriage counseling is always to try to crush expectations and so that they're kind of set up to really appreciate the wonderful and flawed person that God has brought them into their life. I want them to appreciate that person, and whatever sort of expectation of a person they think they're married, that expectation is going to get in the way of them actually engaging with the real human that God gave them. So there is wisdom there. Here's the issue, though, that I have with that premise now. And part of my issue comes maybe a little bit from Gregoire's book. and that is that should people genuinely follow what's expected of them. So if you have
a low bar, there's going to be a low jump.
Yes.
Don't expect them to jump high.
Right. Yeah. Right. So with Gregoire in her book on the Great Sex Rescue, her challenge that I think was appropriate was that we often have such low expectations in terms of, especially with men, that they could ever reach sexual purity. And they were like, wait a second, guys, you have the Holy Spirit, you have empowered by the Holy Spirit, you have self-control, and so you don't have to be always subject to those lower impulses. That shouldn't be an expectation. Going back to the death of porn in that book, no, you're nobility. God's created you in his own image. And so we should have a higher expectation of brothers and sisters in Christ and the gifts of God's Spirit to live in a certain way that that we're not horrible to be around, and we should actually have the aroma of Christ, and there should be an expectation of maturity and of genuine Christian virtue that is a part of the fruit of your life. So I appreciate her book, Gregoire's book, because I think it does sort of shift the expectation higher.
Right.
And then people can kind of live into that higher expectation. Of course, people are still broken. Of course, there's going to be rub and failures along the way, need for grace. All of that is assumed. But in terms of the expectation, I think there's something to, I expect that you're my sister in Christ and that you have the Spirit, and to see some virtue that is a result of God's presence in you. I think that's a good expectation to have. So
I think it would have been helpful for him, though, to tease out, because you're kind of talking in like really high moral categories. I think it would have been helpful to tease out just ridiculous cultural, practical expectations and like moral fulfillment of the Christian's role in marriage, because those are two different things. And to say for like, it's gross that he eats Honey Nut Cheerios really loud, and I'm really repulsed by that, and so therefore I married the wrong person.
Right.
Like but there's a array of like little things like that really do cause problems that are different than what you're talking about.
Right.
Because you should have low expectations of this just over romanticized version of marriage. But I do think your point is true, in that I think we can call people to higher standards and higher expectations in regards to like their moral responsibility in marriage and their Christian role in marriage. Like this feels so very different,
right?
But it feels like he conflates them.
Well, that's because, what he does good in this book is because this is a Christian book,
right?
He has three big rocks. I in my own mind, I think of them as like big rocks of reality. So if you think of your marriage, there's a cylinder and there's three big rocks. There's a lot of rocks, but you want to be sure and always put in the big rocks first.
Right.
So you can put in the little rocks later, right? The three big rocks of reality are God, sin, and the gospel. Those are the three big rocks. And when he mentions gospel, it's in particular the role of Christ on the cross, so that Jesus sacrificing himself for us. Everything he does in this book is in reference to those three realities. And so I think because he has those big theological categories, what you're talking about kind of doesn't really get a lot of mention,
right,
or it just is so overshadowed by the big kind of categories of sin.
Right, but it can just come across as sort of like theological jargon without any real feet.
Right. I mean, it can come off as preachy. And I think we kind of saw this a little bit with the Boundaries book. That,
Right.
I mean, sort of chapter after chapter, it's like, this sounds sermonic.
Right.
It sounds, and it is. I mean, this guy's a preacher.
Right.
Like he's a preacher.
Totally.
So,
But then when it's like, but the gospel, and you're like, oh, I agree with that. But
What
like,
about it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? What does that mean when you keep saying that over and over again?
yeah. So, do you want me to just like to break down like how he sees the three realities?
Sure.
In marriage.
Yep.
So the initial sort of reality to be dealt with is God himself. And interestingly, he quotes Acts 17 from Paul, who says that in him, in God, we live and breathe and have our being. And basically, Paul's kind of drawing on this idea that we can't even exist. Like our very breath, our presence, our existence is all upheld and sustained by God. So he's all encompassing. His presence is everywhere. He's omnipresent. We were created by him, for him, and for his glory. There's nowhere we can go that's apart from his presence. So he is like the ultimate reality. So he makes this point that God is the context of your marriage. And any reference point we have to our relationship with each other should always be what our relationship to God is, because he's the ultimate reality. Our own understanding of meaning and presence and existence comes from and derives from him. So we have to think about our relationship horizontally in order to think of that relationship. We have to think of it initially vertically with God, because he sort of is the context of our marriage at all times. And I think there's something to that. I feel like, especially where we live and sort of our kind of secular context, it is easy, like our culture and kind of how we sort of life comes at you, it's easy to kind of minimize God's presence. And he wants us to do the opposite. No, let's actually appreciate God's presence. And maybe the reason why we have problems in our own marriage is because there's something off in our relationship with God. And there's something to that. Like, I think that's really beautiful. But God, it's not only his presence in our marriage, but that he is the author of our relationship. So God is sovereign. So part of the theological reality,
Yeah, I liked that part,
is that he is the capital A author of our marriage,
of our story.
So Renee and I, we met at an FCA Bible study when I was in college, and Renee had just graduated from college, and there are a number of circumstances, and
It was sort of a one-time event,
it was like a fluke,
and we both weren't supposed to be there.
and yet we were there, and you were sitting on a couch, and there were three other very hunky football players who were sitting next to you, and I just assumed you were with one of those big hunky football players. And yet after the FC Bible study, they got up and went into the kitchen, and you were still right there, and that was the moment. I literally had about a minute.
Acknowledging God's role in that produces gratitude in the relationship.
Yes, and humility.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the opposite of what we've learned in the previous books about agency.
Right.
We want to own our own agency, and
Right.
that's good and right. But there's also an appreciation of God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
He is the actual ultimate agent. And part of being a creature in God's creation is to acknowledge his role as creator and as sovereign over all things, especially our relationship together and our marriage. And so a lot of the issues and idiosyncratic ways in which we relate and the sort of weird, funny sort of realities of our marriage, those are authored by God. They're not mistakes. They're authored by God for his glory, to do something really important in us and refining us as people, for us to enjoy marriage, but ultimately for us to glorify God. So I do like being oriented that
it's a good reset.
this isn't our
reset.
world. Yeah,
Yep.
this isn't our world. This is God's world.
Yeah.
And he's sovereign, we're not. He's God, we're not. And it's his kingdom. It's his righteousness. It's like everything's for him. We actually find peace and joy when we sort of submit to that reality. So in every chapter of this book, there's some reference to like the bigness of God, submitting to that reality. So that's one reality.
First big rock. Second big rock.
Second big rock is connected to the first one, is that, God is big and we owe him everything, and we've sinned against him. So none of us are like come into this world in fellowship with God. We're sort of naturally rebels against God. We naturally want to build our own kingdom, expand our own empire, do our own will, not God's will. Our inclination is for our own glory, not for someone else's glory, not for God's glory, certainly. And so we're rebellious against God. That's sort of the bent of our heart. That's sort of a universal human condition. This is his belief, and this is sort of core message of Orthodox Christianity.
Right. So this isn't necessarily particular to marriage.
No.
This is more just...
This is just like big rock reality.
Yeah.
Sin. And all this is under kind of the title of sin. And so because sin is so universal in its scope, meaning that that kind of decay and brokenness touches every facet of our personality. That there's there's no part of who I am that hasn't in some way been touched by sin. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that there aren't truly good things in all parts of my personality or your personality or relationship, but it just is an acknowledgement that there is some decay there. Because of that, we are universally needy. And so there's no part of who I am, there's no part of who you are that isn't in some need, that doesn't need some intervention of God in some way. This should create a lot of humility. It should create a lot of, when we acknowledge that, an ability to say, I'm sorry, to say, I got that wrong. I'm not okay in this area. I'm sorry. So to kind of put the defenses down, in acknowledging that. However, another sort of aspect of sin, though, is that it actually, a manifestation of sin is overestimating our own individual righteousness.
So are we under, what is this big rock? Sin?
Sin.
And the first big rock was God.
Right.
God.
Okay.
So second big rock is sin. So a part of a manifestation of rebellion against God and our own personal brokenness is that we're defensive. Therefore, anything that I'm doing wrong, I can have a tendency to minimize my own sin because I'm self-protective about that.
And highlight the other person's.
And then it's really easy for me to highlight your fault.
Right.
So I inflate my own sense of righteousness, but then I inflate your sinfulness so that I'm always sort of the helpless victim and you're always the one who's doing things wrong. So this is, I'm saying me or you, but this is kind of the human condition of
that manifests in marriage often.
Yeah, CF, the entire history of civilization. This is how people act towards each other. So a part of the big rock of sin is just recognizing these patterns of self-protection, accusation that manifest in relationship. And every marriage book that we've read so far has some component of this, whether it's Christian or secular.
Right.
So that's there's nothing sort of, I don't think, controversial
profound about that.
So yeah, that's sin. And then the third big category, the big reality is that between sort of the reality of God and the unfortunate reality of our sin, and this is unique to the Christian message, is that this third reality is that of the gospel itself, the good news, that unique in who Jesus is, that Jesus actually uniquely bridges the gap between a holy, all-encompassing God and sinful humanity. That Jesus on the cross, he died. He sacrificed of himself. He paid for our sins. He saw them and recognized them. He absorbed them into himself. And then he then gives us his righteousness. And therefore we have reconciliation with this holy God. The model of marriage that Paul Tripp then suggests that we have needs to imitate what he calls the cruciform nature of the gospel. So the cruciform just means the crucifixion. So Jesus giving of himself for our benefit is the ultimate model for how we relate to each other as husband and wife. So since Jesus gave of himself, then my orientation doesn't need to be for my benefit, but it needs to be for your benefit. How I relate to you, the sort of thoughts that need to go through my mind are like, what is it that Renee needs? What would cause her flourishing? How do I give of myself, even if it's painful, in order to accomplish that flourishing in her life?
Yeah.
So I relate to you not for my own benefit. It's not my own will. It's not my own sort of selfish ends, but it's thinking of your benefit ultimately in mind.
And I think even if you don't adhere to Christianity or the work of Christ, that's a very compelling posture for anyone.
Yes, because I think all of us know the opposite. All of us have been in relationships where you realize this person's in this relationship for themselves.
Right.
It actually has nothing to do with me. And some people get in marriages like this. Some people marry someone else because of how that person makes them feel.
Right.
Or you actually fit within my life. And then marriage problems really are like, this person doesn't make me feel like that anymore. Or I don't know how you fit in my life anymore. Well, that just means that your relationship with your spouse has always been self-oriented, not other-oriented. And so Paul Tripp, again, every chapter in this book, there's some expression of the cross as the model for self-sacrifice, other orientation that I think is super compelling.
Yeah.
And any and all marriage books that we have read up to this point, I think it's hard to find a more compelling example of what we actually want and need in marriage than how he defines and describes a cruciform marriage.
Yeah. Although I do feel like similar to the Boundaries book, it's not a very good cultural fit in some ways.
Right.
Because what you hear mostly is like you listen to yourself, you listen to your body, you listen to your inner voice. I mean, you're not going to really, even though if one found themselves in this situation where someone was selfless, it is so compelling and in such a environment that creates flourishing.
Right.
But you're not going to hear the message. I think most people hear is more self-focused.
You need to do what's right for you.
Yes.
And your spouse be damned. Like,
Yep.
Like
and it's not. I mean, think of the phrases like I just outgrew them, or they're not meeting my needs anymore, or I'm not in love with them anymore, or it is all. Most reasons that relationships do deteriorate often are just because of the flip of this.
I need to focus on me.
Yeah, totally.
And of course, there's enormous deception in that.
Right.
People begin to focus on themselves and orient around themselves. That life caves in on you when you get locked into that pattern. I mean, this is the definition of anxiety. Anxiety is self-fixation, self-orientation. Depression is an inability to kind of get out of that kind of orientation.
I think that's a little oversimplistic of anxiety, but
Yes. But I'm just saying, in an age of anxiety and depression, now we could have a whole other thing on just mental illness and kind of how predispositions and diagnosis.
Right.
When I use those terms, I'm not talking about those specifics. I'm just saying the message we get today about marriage and you need to focus on yourself plays into that narrative that then gets people caught up into a self-focus that leads to unhappiness. And this is remarkably counterintuitive because it's saying, no, focus on someone else. Give your life to someone else's agenda, someone else's mission.
And secondarily, you'll be surprised how it makes you feel.
You actually are filled with joy and hope.
Yeah.
And what you actually want actually can flood in because you're not thinking about satisfying your own needs. You're doing God's will. I'm sacrificing myself for your benefit. And there's incredible joy that comes from that. And anyway, all of that sort of, Christ is the model of that. And he's also the fuel of it as well. He energizes people through the gospel to actually be able to live in this kind of powerful way. So for these reasons, I do like this book, even though I think that if it's just about lowering expectations because of one of those realities, sin, then I think someone could be a little misshapen. I think those expectations maybe need to creep up a little bit higher. But in terms of having God be the ultimate reality, being sobered by the reality of sin, and also be blown away by the reality of the gospel and Christ crucified, it's hard to find a better model of marriage than that. You'll be looking for a long time to find anything more powerful or more compelling than that.
I think, too, just looking at a system that spans out a bit takes a lot of pressure off. Like when you have an overarching goal that's way bigger than us individually, it's easy to tolerate some of the day-to-day sort of slights or whatever. So I think it is, if you can fully embrace the theology from 10,000 feet, it really does help provide grace kind of in the moment and in day-to-day situations.
Totally, because marriage isn't ultimately about what I want.
Right.
And about sort of satisfying all of my individual needs. It's about something that transcends that.
Yeah.
And
so is your only critique that it kind of doesn't call people to a high enough standard, or did you have any other critiques that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like, he says that marriage is a means to an end, which I get why he says that. And we've kind of talked around some of that. But I practically speaking, when people, I think, lean into that my marriage is just a means to an end.
A means to an end meaning for babies or for...
No, for God's glory, sanctification, God's glory.
Yeah.
And of course that's true. And at a certain level. However, it feels kind of like a give up. Like, well, no, maybe you should just be nicer to your spouse. And maybe you should work a little harder to bring some day in, day out joy in your relationship.
And instead of using that reality as sort of a cop-out.
Yeah.
To actually do some real work.
Well, and there's a real question there, too, of like, are you glorifying God by putting in the bare minimum effort to tend to your marriage?
Yeah.
Right.
As well.
Totally.
And one of the gifts that God gives us is marriage. And so even though ultimately marriage isn't sort of the end all be all in terms of eternity and all of that, but it is a gift for today. And so there is value in and of itself. It's a common grace. And so I think if you use that language, means to an end, it
diminishes that a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't like practically what that does in relationships when people really embrace that. he goes off on, because he's a preacher, like he'll have like little tangents here or there. They're just a little kind of annoying. He doesn't like what he calls body part books. He doesn't like, which when he wrote this, there were a number of
like sexual how-tos kind of?
Yes. That were like
anatomically correct.
Well, that were in evangelical world that were crass. So The Great Sex Rescue hadn't been written yet. More like tasteful, dignity-filled books about sex and romance weren't as prevalent as they are right now. Instead, there were other books written by other pastors that were more bombastic. And
can we mention some?
I don't want to.
Okay.
I was going to say there's a list.
Yeah. No,
we could throw some out there.
Yeah.
Well, hey, genuinely, if you do want to know what not to read, refer to episodes 2 and 3 of this season, and the appendix of the Great Sex Rescue, where you get their helpful, not helpful list. And
totally.
These are in the not helpful.
But even like there's some that were written by pastors who, just demeaned women.
Right. Functionally, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And he's responding to that. So I appreciate. He's like, no, this
Don't
isn't
do
what
that.
you need.
Don't do that.
Instead, what you need is to understand what love is, which is you give of yourself to benefit your spouse. So that will eventually be worked out in the bedroom as well. Like, you will be a more giving person. You will care about her needs, what she wants, and not just getting your own needs.
It's trickle down marriage theory.
kind of. And so I think, but I'm saying this as a criticism, like, he doesn't like body part books for that reason, which I kind of get. However, again, practically speaking, some people do need knowledge. They need education.
Yeah.
And we just can't assume that people know how everything works right, or that they have been raised in a family.
Totally. Well, and I think
that sets them up
historically,
well.
many Christian families, sex was a taboo topic to talk about.
Right.
So I think even more so, sometimes in these environments, people don't sort of have the information they need for it to be a good experience for both.
And they've internalized a message about sex that is wrong.
Yep.
But nevertheless, it's sort of, because it was taught in a church or whatever, it has amazing power in their life. So, and we've talked about this in previous episodes. So I get where he's coming from. However, I do think there are some really good resources out there that are body part books.
Yeah. Yep.
That come from, I think, a pure-hearted and have a lot of dignity and respect kind of infused in those books that are different than what was on the market when he was going off.
I mean, I even think for us, we had good education. I think we had good information. And even reading all
our sex book was secular, though.
Oh, yeah. But even, that's true. But I think even just reading some of the books we've read, I think we're like, oh. I mean, I think we've learned some things.
Elaborate.
Not elaborating here, but
I'll give you guys a minute.
As somebody who felt like we had good information going in, it was still kind of helpful.
Absolutely. That's sort of a principle of wisdom and instruction. Like, you instruct a wise person, they become wiser still.
Yeah.
There's always something to be learned, and especially something as complex as the human body.
Right.
If our posture is that of being a disciple, which is a learner, then absolutely there's a ton to be learned, and a lot of good stuff out there now that I think Christians can trust. So I'm not a huge, I don't like that he said that, but I empathize why he did.
So what would you, as a ranking, where would you categorize this book?
I think, okay. In terms of content, like the 3 big realities, it's as good as you'll find. I don't like how it reads. This is the second time I've read it. I read it when it initially came out and wrote a little review on it.
When did it come out? recently or like
No,
decades
years
ago?
ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Several years ago.
Okay.
And I wrote a journal article review on it that I'm sure all of you at home have read, and very well circulated journal bulletin for ecclesial theology. I know all of you have subscriptions to that. But because it feels it feels sermonic. It feels kind of ad hoc, what he talks about and what he doesn't talk about.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel well thought out, like in terms of a program, because it's not. It isn't. I don't like that. So I would give that kind of a lower ranking. But the consistent emphasis on those three realities, it's hard to find a better kind of place to go that sort of hits that over and over and over again. So again, I give it like an 8 for those three realities, and then
what's the combined score?
So a 7.
Okay.
This feels very much like one of my Denver seminary classes, where it's like I end up just kind of giving everyone the same grade. Just that's what it feels like for former students.
Listen,
you're all special.
You at least have to give them an extra point for the mustache and the style.
That's a good.
Yes.
Hey, that's a great.
He has not
I feel
succumbed
corrected by that.
to pastoral laziness in fashion.
He hasn't. Just for that, I'm bumping him up to an 8.
There's
I can change that.
You
right?
can change.
Yeah, you
Okay.
sure
It's
can.
an 8.
There's a running joke amongst the Fellowship Denver staff that his name should be Paul David Drip instead of Paul David Tripp, because it's like, the guy's style is unmatched.
It's pretty impressive.
When you're in your 60s and getting stopped by fashion bloggers to have them take photos of you, it's like, all right, that's probably a good
He
sign.
needs some.
You got to figure it
earned
out.
some points.
Yeah. He earned 1 point, 1 full point. Letter grade
I'll give it a 6.
6.
Yeah. I'm just. I think.
You hang out with too many preachers.
I know it's true, and I think when you read it, you as a counselor, I read it differently. I read it more practically, and even as a Christian reading it, how would it be helpful? And particularly as a non-Christian reading it, how this would be helpful. And it just was a hard apply. It was a hard apply, I think, to someone just picking it up and reading it.
Right.
But I agree with you. I think there's some really beautiful theological conclusions. I just think it's a tricky, direct application.
I wonder if it would read better if there was here's an introduction to Christian theology.
Totally.
This is how the world works.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yep.
Okay. This is how we do marriage in light of this reality.
Yeah. So
Part 1, Part 2.
or part
Sounds
3.
like you guys need to get writing.
All right. Surprise question.
Surprise question. Renee, I think you're asking me.
I feel like we've lost track, so we're just going to roll with me.
Okay.
I may have asked the last one, but who cares? My question for you was going to be related to the tattoo scenario, but then you kind of spoiled it in the
Oh, no,
intro.
I'm sorry.
So I'm scrapping that one and I'm coming up with a new one on the fly.
Okay.
Because I told you it was going to be a silly one, and it might
But
not
now
be.
I'm really nervous.
No, it might not be silly because you stole my thunder early.
I didn't know. I didn't know.
It's okay,
Because
it's
that's
okay,
a
it's
true
okay.
surprise question. I didn't know.
I know.
Yeah, we don't pre-plan these.
We don't.
For you
So-
listeners at home.
We're recording late-ish September, and I feel like this time of the year, you guys ever been on a treadmill and you're like walking on the treadmill and then you turn it up for a jog, and then whether you accidentally or do it on purpose, you just keep hitting increased speed and you're just like trying to hang on.
Yes.
So that's what from now until Christmas break usually feels like for us. Maybe with a little respite at Thanksgiving break. But and this year doesn't feel any different. If not, the schedule feels a little hairier.
Yes, it does.
So what can you do? And I think I've thought about this in terms of me too, but I'm asking you. What can you do so that we're just not hanging on with our hair flying for the next 3 months and just waiting till Christmas break? because I already feel like I'm like, and I do it in a silly way often, but kind of not, like with meaning behind it. Like, you got up at like 4:00 this morning, and I was like, don't get up. Like, stay.
I was thinking about that. Yeah.
Stay here. Come on, just stay. But I feel like I do that silly. You know, I'm teasing. I'm not going to prevent you from doing what you need to do, but kind of with a true intent of like, you're just always on the go now.
Yep.
And you're going to be out of town a lot, which we don't normally do. I just wonder what you're going to do so that we can flourish and not just hold on for dear life.
Just hang on, yeah.
Until you get a week off after Christmas.
Right. I mean, I feel like that's a fair question. And
not silly as the original tattoo is going to be.
Right. I mean, what can we do? What can we do?
What can you do?
What can I do? Mm-hmm. Maintain my agency.
Yep.
Maintain our day off. So our weeks are nuts. But I think what I can do is maintain the commitment to our day off. Mm-hmm. And that's staying locked in. So even though...
But sometimes it's out of your control, because like last week you had a wedding and you were gone by noon.
Right.
On try to maintain our day off.
Right. So, and when you're out of town, yeah.
Right.
So it's not perfect, but with those couple of exceptions, I think that's one thing I can do, is to make sure that work doesn't bleed into that day off.
Yeah.
And just maintain that boundary. Mm-hmm. I'm locked in. We're doing family. We're spending our time together. And another thing I can do is also steal moments with you. Like, I can be more intentional with looking through the calendar, even though it's nuts. When can we have an evening out? Mm-hmm. When can we have a quick date? Or even if it's just hey, I'm going to decide to work from home this day or that day or mm-hmm. this afternoon, and then steal some time with you. Like, those are some things that I think that's sort of within my control.
Yeah.
And another thing too, which is what we've done so far, and this is in honor of the book about lowering expectations, is to know, like, this is going to be a tough season.
Right.
And so our expectation isn't
right.
that we're going to have a lot of great time together. But we're going to be hustling, and we know how to hustle. Mm-hmm. Like, we know how to
mm-hmm.
how to live that life.
Mm-hmm.
So to have those expectations lowered a little bit, while also not being so passive in all of the activity.
And kind of the acceptance of the distraction in all its fullness.
Yeah, and all the lowered expectations
mm-hmm.
that we can't have some real meaningful time together and make it happen. So,
okay.
It's a great question, and it's, I think, important for me to not just think about, but to be proactive about how
to strategize about.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. Honey.
Yes.
I have an important question I need to ask you. And it goes something like this. How can I make your day better?
Well, what
I knew it.
Originally came to mind, you can't do. Because what I really want you to do, I know you can't do it. So...
Okay, I feel something very strong within me wanting to resist. Like, okay, tell me what it is.
We have talked a lot that Dave and I, not our kids, but just Dave and I really like college football. And I love watching, College Game Day. I love it. And it's at 7 a.m. And I love waking up on a Saturday morning and turning it on and getting coffee. And how many times have you done that with me this entire season? How many times?
Now, hold on. What week are we going into?
I know.
Going into week 3.
Into week 3.
So there's been 2 opportunities. So
week 0 doesn't count.
Yeah. But they did have a game day that week.
Did they?
They did. I watched
Listen, this is a conversation for another day, but they had to wheel Lee Corso's barely
Oh my gosh, they've been doing that for
desiccated
years.
corpse onto that set.
I know.
They need to let that
It was a
man.
disaster.
They need to let that poor man.
I know, retire.
Have his rest.
Let
I
him
know,
retire.
Yeah.
But
hasn't
it's
happened.
really fun. So how many times have we done that this season?
0 together.
And then are we going to get to do that Saturday?
No,
Why?
it's after work.
See, I told you, and you're not going to skip that meeting. You're not going to do that and make that. And I don't think you can actually. Like, I
Right.
don't think you. It's not. You
It's not
can't
your
say
meeting
you
to
can't
move,
say I'm
right?
not coming to this because I'm going to watch College Game Day with my wife.
Right.
Not
because
your meeting to move.
we've pre-agreed, like we've already pre-agreed that these meetings
Are a priority.
are a priority. It's just now they're falling on times when it's a real it cost.
Okay, so that's what you could do to make my day better. I'd be so excited. And we could do homemade cinnamon rolls the night before. That always makes it so much better. Coffee and cinnamon rolls.
I mean, could you watch it on? I know this is blasphemy. Could you watch it on delay? Can you
Well,
like
But then it
get on
bleeds into the
YouTube
first
TV?
game.
Yeah, but I mean, if just
It's just the first thing in the morning. And I don't feel bad about laying in bed for a couple of hours from like 7 to 9.
Right.
I'm not going to lay in bed from noon to 2.
yeah, for sure.
So it just feels like anyway.
That's when it's a precious time. I get it.
And then, okay, so what can you do other than that to make my day better? Gosh, honey, today.
Can I tell you something I've already done to make?
Yes,
I did
I need a cue. What?
Before we started this podcast, canceled a meeting.
Your evening meeting?
Yeah, so that we can have an evening together.
No, you didn't.
I did. I canceled it.
He did. It was with me. Just kidding.
I think it was ironically, I think it was pre-marriage counseling.
It was. They're doing. This couple is going to be just fine. They're doing great. They're doing fantastic.
So I'm gonna already fulfill my request is that you cancel a meeting for tonight. So
Yeah,
we can
already
hang
did
out.
I did it.
Oh, my day's already better.
Oh, yay.
Thanks. All right, last thing.
What are you into, Nene?
Well, this was Jesse. Do you have something you're into? Mine's so stupid.
Always, but no. You. Here's the thing. You can't sandbag like that because you already prefaced it earlier in the episode.
Oh, it's so
Let her
silly.
rip. Let her rip.
I mentioned this to Dave yesterday because we really did have kind of our first cool day, and so we have central air in our house, but then we've also added a window unit into our bedroom,
Right.
For architectural reasons that I won't go into, because our bedroom is the hottest room in the house for different reasons, but we had one for years and it was kind of a dinky, cheap, and then this year we upgraded.
Yeah.
And we bought like a legit window unit. And I'm just so grateful for the window unit. It is made.
How many times has this window unit made an appearance on the podcast?
At least 4 that I can remember, probably more than that.
I'm so into creating an environment that you're comfortable in and that you can thrive in.
Yeah.
And so I've just been so great. This summer I have not had. I mean, I can wake up in the middle of the night if I'm hot, like in a panic.
Our snuggle game has been on point
Our
this summer.
snuggle game has been. I told you that
Never before
because of the
that.
window unit, and I'm so into create. Maybe it's not just the window unit. Into creating an environment that you can flourish in, an actual physical bedroom environment, and that window unit that we bought in the spring, we paid more for it, and it has paid dividends.
It's come through, hasn't it?
Yes, I'm so into it.
No, that's a value in our house. The like, and we've not been quite as great about this recently because life's been insane and clutter. Just stuff happens. But like having it be a value where our room is our room. Like
Yep.
it's a sanctuary,
Yep.
it's a retreat. Like that's a tended to and cared for space.
Yep.
Right.
Same.
So creating that environment, that's a
Yep.
big deal. That's a
Yep.
big deal.
Yep.
I wouldn't say that's silly at all. Dave, what are you into?
Oh gosh.
What are you into, honey? Getting up at 4 a.m. to work on
write,
presentations.
yeah.
To write and work
I've got
on
one if you need
presentations.
if you need a minute to think.
Yeah, no, I am in a good writing phase right now. So I'm kind of into sort of composition, writing sentences that look good, that then create paragraphs, that then create chapters. So I'm kind of into that right now. I go through ups and downs of writing, but I'm used to being behind on deadlines. I'm kind of stretching like.
Yeah, you're stretching the graciousness to those that you owe papers or books or whatever to right now.
I'm pretty behind.
It stresses me out so much.
Right. I don't
And
care.
it doesn't stress. It
I don't
doesn't
care.
stress Dave out.
Are you
one iota?
Are you more of a gardener? Like, do you just kind of plant stuff and see how it grows, or do you go into the pretty rigid outline of?
He just
I'm a gardener for sure.
and he just doesn't care that he doesn't care if people might be frustrated with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like he doesn't care at all.
Well, it's not that I don't care. It just
It doesn't bother you.
It's not that it doesn't bother me. It's just that it doesn't reach a level of me being able to feel it.
If I'm late somewhere, it's like so stressful. If I'm just like late somewhere,
Right.
I can't imagine being like months behind on a deadline.
Right.
Like I'm just too much of a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that about you. And actually it's helpful because I can get so worked up about like, this has to be done right on time. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the due date or whatever. Like it's helpful for me to have that presence.
Right.
But I cannot fathom just being able to hold that so loosely.
Right. But part of it's just I try to be honest with whoever it is expects something from me. But regardless, even though it is way behind, I'm into the writing process right now. I really enjoy it. I wrote earlier this week a few pages of a thing that hopefully will one day be a book, and I thought it was awesome. Like I thought it was fun to write, and I think the fruit of it was pretty good. So,
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm into it.
One of my favorite quotes from you, Dave, and I don't know when I asked you this, but it was kind of regarding this topic where I was like, how in the world do you like manage all of this? And you said, the crux of my job is disappointing people at a rate that they can handle. I thought that was so poignant and true. You're like, I just disappoint people at a rate that they can handle.
Yeah.
Hey, know thyself.
At a rate in which I can remain in relationship with you.
Relationship
We're
with
not
them.
burning bridges.
Yeah.
Actively
Yeah.
burning bridges.
Right. No, that is true.
All right, Jesse, what are you into?
Man, I'm just really into live music. I saw one of my favorite bands in the world at Red Rocks on Monday night, The War on Drugs, and we're 3 days later and I'm still floating.
That's awesome.
I love. There are few things in the world that root themselves into my soul better than live music. So,
Wow.
Can I ask you a novice music connoisseur question?
Ooh, please.
War on drugs, are they actually combating
war
the
with
drug
drugs?
problem?
The War on Drugs is a very tongue-in-cheek name.
Because they participate in drug use.
I wouldn't say that they are proponents or I don't think they encourage recreational drug use. I think that without getting political on our marriage podcast, if you were to look at the rollout and the success/failure of the War on Drugs program, I think the heart of all of that is what might inform the name of the band a little more than anything.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
Okay.
less than encouraging people to use drugs.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to encourage my kids to listen to bands that are actively combating the drug problem.
Or at least not condoning it,
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, thanks for listening again. And
Nailed the dismount.
Yeah, that was great.
We'll see you next week. And I hope you, if you're married, enjoy your spouse this week.
Yay.
Hey,
All
happy first day of fall, everybody.
Yes.
Yes, everyone, lower those expectations. Bye.
Bye.